Hi and welcome to all students of Research and Information Skills. My name is Mike Harris. I'm the unit coordinator for this particular unit. I will be obviously doing all the recordings for this semester. There should be around 13, perhaps more if I have to do any additional recordings. I guess I should tell you a little bit about the way that these recordings will work. There's two things that perhaps I need to say about these. The first is that for me, I struggle with the idea that you'd have to listen to me for a couple of hours per week. So these recordings will all be truncated or abridged in some way. In other words, that I'll be covering the essential material for each week. I won't be doing necessarily a blow-by-blow account of the PowerPoints. What I'll do is I'll highlight or pick out the things that I see as being the most relevant, and hopefully reducing most of these recordings to around, maybe half an hour at most. I'm hoping shorter, because I'm not sure that necessarily there is a lot to be said about some of the aspects of this particular subject. As far as I'm concerned, and I've already indicated this in the introduction video, that I believe that research and information skills is something that needs to be done. You need to be actually going out and pursuing information on your own account. And the sooner you start doing that, the more proficient you'll become with actually acquiring and then applying research and information skills. The other thing that I'd like to say about these recordings is that I accept that for the most part you guys as distance students will probably not obviously have the same benefits as attending students in terms of being part of tutorials, etc. So what I might do, and this will probably be somewhat difficult, but I'll try and include some material in each recording for each week regarding the tutorials, and maybe just to give you a flavour of some of the things that perhaps I would hope you'd, take away from such a session. I accept in advance that it's not going to be the same as if you were here. However, it might give you some insights that you perhaps otherwise wouldn't have had. This initial recording is going to cover the unit outline, which I believe is important enough to have its own recording, and I just want to take you through the unit outline, which you can obviously look at on Milo directly as I'm talking about it, or you should have a hard copy that was sent to you via our team. Either way, it's fine, but there'll be certain things I'd like to draw your attention to. Anyway, if you could get a copy of the unit outline now, that would be fantastic. Okay, now you've got the unit outline in front of you. I draw your attention to page 2, which has a list of the personnel on this unit. For all of those who are distance students, I'd obviously get you to look at Dr. Julie Johnson, who is the distance tutor. All of your assignments will inevitably go to her in some form or other. If you send it via mail for the first assignment, then it'll be going to Julie, so please take note of the postal address. Or you'll be submitting it via Milo, which again she will be the one who actually addresses those and marks them. She's an important contact. I should make it quite clear that I do not get the material from distance students, so do not send it to me, because inevitably I have to forward it on to her. And that's just a note, because often during a semester students will send me material which obviously, like I said, I have to send on, and that's just double handling. Moving to page 4, I'd like to at least briefly go through unit description and the unit rationale. These two are obviously important because they indicate why you're doing this particular unit and how it'll benefit you in terms of your studies. In terms of the description itself, and I don't necessarily want to read it verbatim, it looks at and tries to develop your ability to find information, and more importantly, trying to support any of the work that you do for your assignments. So research and information skills is the thing that underpins and helps, as I say, support the work that you do at university. And inevitably, research and information skills are skills that you employ almost every day in some form or other at university, not just around your assignments. Even better than that, well, I think it's better, is that you can apply it in your personal life. So when you actually go looking for things, in terms of hobbies or just private interests, you have a whole armoury of ways of actually obtaining information and so on. More importantly, you can get the big questions in life answered, because you'll know where to look, whether the information is actually reliable and accurate, and whether it's actually worth believing in. And I think they're fairly important things in today's wash or saturation of information that we have around us every day. The rationale behind the unit simply rests on the fact that you need to find information. As I said earlier, you'll be reading a lot of information. You'll need to be able to posit that in certain ways, categorise it, and then apply it. Certainly in relation to assignments and so on. And the quicker you can learn to test the reliability and accuracy of information, and then work out how you can actually apply that to your work, to underpin particularly arguments or a position, for instance, will, I guess, in some respects, make your road in the academic world a much smoother one. I think more importantly, and this is certainly a personal level for me, or at least it's at a personal level, is that you begin to examine through certain questions you ask of the information you're reading, very quick avenues for determining whether information is of any real interest and importance to you. But also it can help hone your own kind of, I guess, your intelligence almost, because as I said, often you can begin to throw out information that is seen to be unreliable, for instance, and arguments that are flawed. You begin to dismantle those and no longer use them, I guess, and then you move on to having a much more veracity in terms of your arguments, etc. And it's not just about argument, although academia is often about a conversational argument in a sense, but it's about actually discovering things that perhaps you may have taken for granted, and then you slowly work out whether those things are actually to still be believed in, to be followed in that sense. This can be a little bit unsettling, a little bit difficult and surprising at times, but that's the challenge of academia ultimately. I suppose the other thing is that I guess I'll draw your attention to the third paragraph, is that as information savvy students you can learn to conduct your own investigations, that you probe sources, you question the information you've got, as I've already said. You look at authority, which I think is very important, particularly in today's world, and obviously using academic diligence, and in terms of acknowledging and referencing your sources, that you respect the people that you get those ideas from. And that to me is one of the most important things, because ultimately, is anything original? Do we have any original ideas? They're fundamental questions, but I'll let you do the research and find out whether there is anything original. Now, in terms of outcomes and achieving things, what I'd like to kind of draw your attention to is the intended learning outcomes on page 2. Oh, sorry, I've just realised that I've made a mistake in terms of referencing the page numbers. Anyway, the intended learning outcomes on page 2. What I hope you achieve by the end of these, and I hope you can tick them off as you go along, is first of all that you can, number one, identify and retrieve information from a variety of sources, and that we more or less start that the first week. Number 2, you can select information appropriate to the academic task. For me, I'm hoping that, like I said, by the end of this you'll know where to look for information, how to retrieve it, how to then apply it in your work, and then I could consider our job done. I think a lot rests on number 2. Number 3, apply the requirements of referencing, informed by the notion of academic integrity, and this is a big one. I talk about plagiarism quite often throughout certainly the early weeks of this semester, so if it does sound like a bit of a mantra, please forgive me. Number 4, that you develop research and information strategies for an academic task. So this is just like 2, that you're actually looking at a more specific approach, a strategy or a tactic to get information to actually help you in the academic tasks that you have to do this semester. And so 2 and 4 for me are the big ones in terms of what the outcome should be. Certainly number 3 is one that I'm hoping will just simply become part of your everyday work, that you reference and you acknowledge the sources that you have and that you use. I'll let you read the rest of the material up to page 6. I just want to draw your attention to, I guess, the recommended readings for this particular unit. If you can, and you have the money, buying one of the books, particularly the top one, Gretham's book, How to Write essays, which is a second edition. For me personally, I think it's a really good book to use. You'd be using that throughout your time at university. I think it's worth the price, I guess, because it would be a long-term reference book for any of the work that you do. Not necessarily cheap, but certainly worth the investment if you decide that you want to pursue studies at university. As I say, it's a constant reference. Brick's Academic Culture is another good one. I think either of those is a good choice. And Simfield's is good too. I use Simfield's generally. Personally, I use it at work because, like I said, I have to cover other units, and I find that it has a fairly good cover. However, like I said, in terms of direct essay writing, which I think is a skill within itself and one that you'll have to develop, I still think that Greetham's book is probably a good purchase. But I'll let you do that. There's no prescribed texts for this particular unit, so you don't have to buy any of those books. I'll let you consider that. Like I said, for me, it's an investment. Now, regarding the lectures, there's a schedule on page 7. As far as I'm concerned, certainly at the Cradle Coast, any distance student is welcome to come in for lectures and tutorials. The details are there on when they're actually occurring and in what room and on which campus. It's a courtesy, if you want to actually attend any of these, that you contact the lecturer. In this case, it'll either be Erica, Julie, or myself. And say, look, is it okay if I come and attend, the lecture on such and such a day? For the most part, I don't see any issues with that. I mean, although you'll have to negotiate that with the individual lecturer. Now, just moving briefly to the assignments, I don't want to sort of drag this recording out too long, but I just want to briefly go over what you have to do for each assignment. If you'll have a look on page 8, there is a list of literally not only each assignment, but obviously the weighing for each and the due dates for each. As far as I'm concerned, the first one is, I guess, one that I'm hoping most students can at least begin to tackle some of the issues around academic and non-academic sources and why the two need to be differentiated and why we can and can't use certain sources in our work, and certainly in the academic world. Number 2 is a source log. That's 30% as a weighing, so it's actually starting to get a little bit more difficult. And number 3 is a literature research project, which for me is probably the big one and perhaps the most interesting for most students. That's where you get a chance to sort of flex your own interest and your own abilities, really, to explore an issue or a subject that you're interested in. And the last is the participation mark, which covers your general performance across the whole semester. Getting down to specifics for each of the assignments, assessment 1 is, well, for me, like I said, it's an opportunity for you to actually take one of the subjects or questions that I've put for each of the pathways that exist in the Bachelor of General Studies. If you have a particular interest in another area that you think would actually serve you better in terms of an assignment, then you can probably negotiate that with a distance tutor. I'll let you do that. You can email Julie and ask whether it would be appropriate if you had a different subject. I really only put these up for as a starting point, although I would expect most students who will use these, even if you don't have a huge amount of interest in it, it will be worth exploring, because it's not about your interest in the subjects, it's about whether you can differentiate between academic and non-academic sources. Now, what you'll be doing is writing a comparative statement of difference. In other words, you'll be looking at two different sources and comparing them and working out how they are different and why they are different. In the case of academic work, there's certain standards, and you'll find those out, certainly in week 3 and 4, but particularly week 4, and how they differentiate from non-academic sources. So in essence, what you're looking at, like I said, in this case it could just be a newspaper report and a periodical, and that, by periodical I mean an academic periodical, pulling out two articles that relate to the same subject, so they're talking about the same thing, and working out, okay, what are the statements being made here, how are they supported, are they backed up, are they referenced in any way, is there acknowledgements, etc. And also simply the accuracy of what's being said. Now, the word count on this is approximately 500 words. There's usually 10% that we allow, for I guess excess, and we say that 10% under, 10% over is okay. So in essence, you've got 550 words to cover this. You could put a case in for perhaps I guess a slightly larger word count, but for me, keeping to word counts is a discipline within itself, and you have to learn this rather quickly. So that being the case, you've got 250 words, perhaps 2 reasonable paragraphs, quite large paragraphs, to actually write this particular piece. However, there will be a template that'll be put up, and that frame or template will allow you to write within that particular frame about how these two sources are different. The key thing that I have to highlight here is the note that I've put on the bottom of this in bold, and it's in italics. And I want to read that now to make sure everyone's clear about this. This exercise is not about highlighting or exploring the points being presented in an argument, regardless of how interesting and engaging they may be, but more about what conventions are used in different styles of writing. So what I'm hoping you'll do is, it doesn't matter how interesting or dull that your articles are, but you can actually look at and measure an argument according to a whole range of criteria which you will be provided with, and within that criteria, that creates a difference, or that's how you observe a difference between writing styles and different types of sources. Anyway, like I said, the key thing is not to actually necessarily engage in the articles themselves or in the sources, but to actually highlight how they're different. So the differences are the important bit. Of course, there may be an aspect of an argument that you pull out perhaps to highlight a point, but you wouldn't do it with all of them. And certainly, like I said, engagement in the argument often will waste word count. And given that it's such a limited word count, 500 words passes fairly quickly, and that you have to cover a reasonable amount of terrain in that time, I would suggest do not take too many tangents, do not engage too heavily in the argument itself, or the points being made. This, of course, will all become clear over the coming weeks when there's much more indication and instruction about how this assignment is to be done. Now, moving to assignment 2. In the case of assignment 2, you've got to construct a search log and a reference list. I think, reasonably clear instructions that cover this in the unit outline. For me, it's about you literally obtaining 7 sources that are all appropriate or that you could use in developing an answer to a task or an assessment, for instance, and then you've got to justify those sources. I've indicated that you have to use approximately 150 words for each source in terms of your justification or defence of that particular source. I'll give you, I guess, additional instructions. Anyway, I've put a note in there on page 11, which says, certainly under Part B, the justifications you give for the inclusion of an article should be based on your understanding of the authority test outlined in the Week 4 lecture and any other reasons you feel are pertinent to your choice. So, the authority test, which, as is indicated in the Week 4 lecture, will also be the basis of your, the basis of your arguments in assignment 1. This is just an extension of that to ensure that you're actually, the learning is embedded, and I guess it's enforced by having to use it again in assignment 2. Now, there'll be a template for this, as I've indicated, and which I'm expecting will be used only because of ease and accessibility in terms of marking, etc. Now, the key part here that many people seem to either forget or do poorly is Part C. You have to compile a separate reference list for the items in the Harvard referencing style. Now, for me, in terms of the initial use of the template and then putting together a bibliography, or in this case a reference list, the records have to be accurate because it's got a fairly high weighing. Anyway, it's crucial. The last part, Part D, you have to develop an answer to the question for the discussion in the week 13. So in other words, you have to come to a position after doing all the research and finding out what sources would be appropriate to answer the particular essay question I've posted. you have to then formulate some sort of answer from your research. So I'm not expecting you to read every article, but I would expect that you'd have at least a cursory glance over the abstract for an article, for instance, or at least look at the conclusion and introduction, and then come to an informed position. So have an informed opinion about the particular subject, and you'll be asked in the week 13 lecture what your answer is to that question. So it's worth writing down. You don't have to formally submit Part D with your actual assessment, but like I said, for me, in the case of distance students, it would be good if you could maybe make some sort of contribution. So it's not formally assessed and it's not marked necessarily. However, I'll give you an opportunity to actually put that material up in week 13 in a discussion board, but it would be kind of good, like I said, for me personally, if you could include it somewhere perhaps in your answer to D, although like I said, it's not going to be marked. And why am I asking you to do that? I guess so I and others on the team can find out whether you actually have understood the process and what it actually means in terms of coming to an informed position. So that's my justification. Anyway, I'll put in a discussion board. That'll be at least the first port of call for you guys. There will be further instruction on this and other things, other aspects of the actual assignment. But like I said, there'll be a template provided, certainly in the week 6 module. The last assignment, the literature research project, is much bigger. And as far as I'm concerned, perhaps it's the linchpin of this particular unit, and perhaps the most interesting one for you guys. Essentially what I'm asking you to do is actually choose a topic, choose a subject. Now I'll put a list of topics and questions up as we get further into the unit, just in case you're stuck and you can't think of anything to write about. It's not to say necessarily that you'll necessarily take one of mine. However, it might just be a stepping stone to you to actually work out what your interests are. And what you have to do essentially is write 1,500 words based on research that you've looked at and done in your particular interest, your subject area. And for me, like I said, the fact that it's your project, that you end up having to do weeks of research on a particular subject and put it together, I hope will kind of engender, I guess, a longer term interest in a particular area. The alternative is, of course, is that something that perhaps you've got a vague interest, but you feel that it would be good to have almost the luxury of being able to investigate during sort of work time, so to speak. And here's your opportunity. You can actually just spend several weeks looking up a particular subject to write about that you may have always had an interest but never had any time to actually do it. Anyway, I'll leave that up to you. The key thing is, I have to say that there's several aspects to the project, and all are worth noting in some form or other. First of all, there's a proposal, and we'll be doing work on that, not only in tutorials, but I'll put together some information for distance students for actually submitting a research proposal. And essentially what a proposal is that you indicate what you want to do the research on, and then how you're actually going to undertake that research, etc. The second, which is question analysis, where you actually formulate your own question and work on that question and annotate it, and then look at, okay, what are the pathways that come from that in terms of the research that you can achieve and you'll get within the time frame. Research record, which is slightly, I guess, more complicated, but looks at how you actually put your project together, what you found, where you all the basic background to the research that you did, and I'll talk much more about that when we get further towards the end of the semester. And obviously a completed research project, which is, I'm saying 1,250 words. I indicated that it's 1,500 words in total for all of those different aspects combined. The actual completed research project is 1,250 words. However, as far as I'm concerned, there is some flexibility in that. I think some people may go over 1,500 words. I guess what it does really, by nominating a figure somewhat arbitrarily of 1,500 words, it means that you at least have a boundary or a marker. I allow certainly some of my students on campus to do more than that if they choose a fairly complicated or complex particular thing to investigate, and it involves a much higher word count. Although I would argue that personally I wouldn't want probably more than 1,700 words, and this is a personal thing. I mean, you'd have to negotiate possible word count with Julie. If you think if there is going to be an overrun, a serious overrun of words, then I would, like I said, negotiate with Julie to some extent and see what she feels is best. The other thing that I would say in terms of the word count, I've said 1250 for the actual project. The other bits, like I said, are a composite and should add up to another 250 words or so. For me, like I said, the final project itself, the 1250 words, should be somewhere in that figure. It can be a bit more, like I said. Obviously you've always got the 10% margin. But like I said, if you are going to overrun your word count, like I said, negotiate, or at least try and reduce the amount of words that you have before you begin negotiating. Don't simply write 2,000 words and then go from there. See how you can actually reduce it, etc. Anyway, the research project will ultimately be up to you. You've got the kind of margins there, you've got the things that you have to do. As far as I'm concerned, like I said, it'll be a work in progress over perhaps a month, and there'll be different tutorials, different things that'll indicate what you have to do. That'll give you a step up in each direction, and each of those things will go out to distance students via Milo. The last assessment task is participation, and really that is about you participating in discussion boards and any online activities that are obviously indicated, and ultimately that you, I guess, shows your literally your level of participation as a student in this unit. Obviously, the more you participate, the greater your participation mark. I have to say that it's much harder to measure as a distance tutor. When you're a distance student, like I said, you can contribute when you can. Given that it's 10% of the overall weighing, it's worth at least keeping an eye on, because that's a whole grade. So personally, I think, like I said, providing you can actually come in and actually regularly log on to Milo and Indicate, and that you post on discussions at least once to each discussion board, or at least, like I said, where there's discussions made, but particularly, like I said, in terms of the discussion for your research project and certainly assignment 2, I'll let those things be measured by Julie. Obviously she's the professional in all this, but that would be my expectation. Now, perhaps the most important thing is that you put the due dates down. Obviously the first assignment is due on the 24th of March, so you have around 6 weeks after we start class that you literally begin to contribute. I said 6 weeks, I'm obviously a little bit generous there, it's actually 5. Then you have the second assignment, which is due on the 28th of April. Then the third assignment, the big one, which you're going to have to do quite a lot of work on, is the 26th of May. As I said to you during the recording, that it'll end up inevitably being about a month of hard work, and the participation is ongoing, so it's about how you contribute to different discussion boards. Please mark them down in your diary somewhere. If you need it, there are the possibility of getting extensions, or there is the possibility of getting an extension for any of these assignments, but I wouldn't recommend it. From past experience, students who inevitably get extensions, that time eats up into their next assignment, and it becomes more and more difficult for them to keep up. So personally, try and stick to the deadlines. You'll find it much easier as you go along. To finish this recording off, I'll just draw your attention to the unit schedule. For me, like I said, this is, I guess, the pathway, the timeline, the road ahead, the map. So all of these things will be obviously fleshed out in Milo. Each week there'll be a lot of materials relating to this. I have to confess that often I put a lot of material on, maybe too much sometimes for some students. I guess what I'd like to do by putting a lot of material on is give you the option of not doing not reading a particular piece of work. In this case, it might be instructions to how to do certain things, or it might be an indication about referencing or whatever it is. And by all means, use your own judgment. If you haven't got the time to look at certain sources or resources that I put on there, obviously be judicious in which ones you reject and which ones you read. I put them all on there, just so you have that choice.
Anyway, beyond the formalities that I've just been through of this unit, for me personally, I'm really looking forward to teaching this semester. I enjoy the unit. I enjoy putting it together, despite the fact that sometimes it can be incredibly hard work. You know, we're going through a revision of the unit at the moment, and there seems to be far more work than I've got time to do. But that's my problem, not yours. So you won't see it at your end. And I just hope that you get a lot out of this unit, because I expect you to. As I say, and the teaching staff are all dedicated to that whole process, that you have a great experience. Anyway, I'll see you or speak to you in the next recording. Bye for now.